I want to end today by speaking directly to kids once again. I know many of you are in virtual school again. Many of you have made more sacrifices over Christmas, over the holidays, not seeing your friends, not seeing your loved ones. This is not easy. And I know almost half of kids across this country have gotten their vaccine from ages 5 to 12. And there are people who've probably gotten very sick from vaccinations.
We know there is a risk, a very small risk, 1 in 5,000 that may get myocarditis, for example.
We need to get more.
Very small
please
risk.
ask your parents if you can get vaccinated. Getting vaccinated protects yourself, protects your family, protects your grandparents, protects
by the way,
people.
I can't listen to this crap anymore.
Pfizer COVID vaccine.
Well, we'll stop after
tested
this.
On stopping the transmission.
Forget it. Can't do it. Half of what Justin Trudeau said right now, right there, I think qualifies as misinformation under YouTube's new opaque bullcrap rules. Everybody, I'm sorry to start off with that level of torture, but for the torture that the guest today, Tamara Lich, has gone through, we all have to suffer through another minute of Justin Trudeau in order to understand exactly what the hell went down in Canada over the last few years. And okay, hold on. Sorry, yeah, it's off, Leos. I'm not going to do much of an intro because we have a guest. She's in the backdrop. I've been waiting for this. I don't know how. It's been close to 2 years now. I've been waiting for this since that, call it famous, call it infamous, call it iconic photograph of Tamara Lich, and I double-checked as to the 4 variations of the pronunciation of her name. Tamara Lich being arrested, I think it was, I'm fairly certain it was a Friday night, cold February Friday night, quiet streets of Ottawa, Tamara Lich being handcuffed and hauled off for indefinite detainment. And I had to sit here arguing with some of these Trudeau supporting idiots on Twitter. It wasn't indefinite. She got out. Yeah, it's indefinite when you don't know when you're going to get out. Pat King went through a lot more than her just saying. I've talked a lot about Pat King. This is not a victim oppression Olympics right now. And Pat King went through less than the Coots for. It's not a question of that. We're living through a period of absolute political insanity that is being normalized, tyranny that is being normalized, tyranny that's being democratized. And Tamara Lich is perhaps the most iconic face of what Canada has gone through in the last 3 years, but not the only one, but has a story to tell nonetheless. We're going to leave off YouTube. Everybody knows the rules. No medical advice, no legal advice, blah, blah, blah. If you want to support the channel, they have these things called super chats. Seize the day. I remember we met in Ottawa once upon a time. Long live Canadian Queens. Thank you, Tamara. We haven't been able to do this interview for the longest of times because as part of Tamara Lich being released from prison, or from jail, from pretrial detention on non-violent mischief charges, she had a totally logical, rational, constitutional prohibition on free speech, prohibition on gathering, going on social media. We're going to get into it. And if you don't know who Tamara Lich is, you're going to know because my interviews are in depth. We've got some time, and we're going to start at childhood, as always. All right, Tamara, enough of the intro. Everyone's trickled in. Share the link around. Rumble is there. You know what to do. All right, I'm bringing in the woman of the hour, the person of the hour, the guest of the week, Tamara Lich. Tamara?
Hi.
At the risk of asking the obvious, how goes the battle?
It goes well, actually.
you haven't, I don't know. You seem to always be smiling despite. And so it is encouraging, almost inspiring when someone does not lose a smile after having gone through what I know that you've gone through, but the world is going to know in great detail. 30,000 foot overview before we get into the minutia of the detail of the history that has been your life.
Mm-hmm.
30,000 for those who don't know, who are you?
Well, my name is Tamara. I was a part of a little thing called the Freedom Convoy that happened about a year and a half ago. And I called Chris Barber one day and said, "Hey, I want to help you guys. This is what I can do." And boom.
All right,
we didn't see that coming.
Nobody saw what happened coming, I guess, except for those who were planning it all along. But okay, we're going to start like all the way back at the back. You're from are you born and raised in Medicine Hat?
No, I'm born and raised in Saskatchewan, little towns all in Saskatchewan. My dad bought grain for the wheat pool when I was young, and those positions, they moved you around quite a bit. So I've lived in a few small towns in southern Saskatchewan, and I moved to Medicine Hat in 1998.
And I asked for permission before we started. How old are you? And
I'm
this is only, it's relevant to the story, people. It's not just, curiosity.
Oh yeah, I'll be 51 in September, September 19th.
51 in September, born and raised in Canada. And I say 51, you are, unless I'm mistaken, you're not just a mother, but a grandmother as well.
Yes, I am a grandma. Yeah.
This becomes relevant for what I'll call the inhumanity of what you went through. How many generations has your family been in Canada? And where are they from? Where were your parents from? What did your parents do?
Well, I was adopted. So my birth parents were from Cold Lake, the Cold Lake area. They're Métis, or my birth mother was Métis. My grandmother was Cree, and my grandfather was Métis from the Frog Lake Reserve in, I believe it's Alberta. And my adopted family is Norwegian and Irish. So they've been here 4 generations.
Okay, there's going to be, I'm going to unpack a bit here because this is actually fascinating. Métis and Cree. Métis is part, I don't know if we say native or indigenous anymore, but part native, part European, and Cree is from northern Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Saskatchewan, the Cree were Plains Indians.
May I ask, do you know the story of your being put up for adoption and adopted by the family? Like, how did that happen, if you know, and when did you find out in your life?
Well, Mom and Dad always made sure that I knew because they didn't want it to be a surprise to me later on. They were always very honest about it and open. And I have 5 other siblings in my family too, and I was the only one that was adopted. So my parents at first were told that they couldn't have children, so they adopted me, and I guess I brought them some good luck because then they had 5 more of their own.
That's so good. You were the first of their children adopted, and then they had, through whatever miracle that happened, 5 kids after having.
Yes.
Okay,
my mom had 3 miscarriages before they adopted me, so yeah. So I always knew that I was adopted, and then when I was 18, I went through an organization called the Triad Society. I had a closed adoptions have really changed in 50 years. They're not, they used to be very private, and but if you wanted to meet your birth parent, then you would send a letter to this organization, and if they wanted to meet you, they would send a letter to this organization, and so I met her actually in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, when I was, I think, just 19 years old.
Okay, before we even get there, because if you don't mind, I have to ask a bunch of questions about that.
Yes.
Growing up now, so you're the oldest of 6. Always known that you were adopted. How young in the spacing of your 5 brothers and sisters?
Well, there's myself, and then my brother was he's 2 years younger than me, and then there's 11 months between him and my next sister, and about 3 years between her and my next sister, and a couple years between her and my next sister, and then I think it's 7. My youngest brother was a surprise.
It's amazing. So you got Norwegian twins in there somewhere, or the Irish twins. And your parents, what did they do? What was life like growing up?
Well, like I said, my dad bought grain for the wheat pool when I was really young, and he also had his own trucking company for a little while when I was very young. And then he worked a lot in the oil patch and on farms and stuff. So we moved around a lot. I think I went to 5 or 6 different schools from kindergarten to grade 12. So we moved around extensively, which teaches you to become rather adaptable,
The moving around, in hindsight or in retrospect, do you have resentment for it, or did it end up being a positive in that you met more people than you otherwise would have ever met had you stayed in one spot?
Well, I can't really compare the two because I don't know what it would be like to be in one spot. But I mean, we were always the new kids in school, right? Which did have its challenges sometimes, of course, especially as we got older and became teenagers. But looking back, I think it is positive. It did teach me how to be adaptable, and it did teach me how to, make friends and learn how to talk to people.
Now, for someone who grows up to be a rebel of an adult, were you always a rebel as a kid? Did you get into trouble? Were you defiant of authority, or were you, a perfect angel of a child, and then suddenly said enough is enough to authority as an adult?
No, I was definitely not an angel. I've been a rebel for a long, long time. I think the last time we moved, I was in high school, or yeah, I was just going into high school, and we moved at that point to a small town in Saskatchewan, and I didn't want to move anymore at that point, and so I did start rebelling a little bit. Not listening to curfew. I ran away from home a couple times, just like nonsense, just stupid nonsense stuff, right?
Okay, now before we get into education, so at 19 years old, you've always known since consciousness that you were adopted, and there is a program. I recall there being something similar under Quebec adoption law, where the parents, when they put the child up for adoption, can say, I'm amenable to being contacted later on if they so
Yes.
choose. So you chose to do that. How old, if I may ask, like, how old was your mother when she had you? Did you discuss the circumstances of the adoption? And the obvious question, any resentment, or is it nothing but love and understanding by the time you meet your biological mother?
Oh, no resentment whatsoever. She didn't tell me a lot. She's a very private person. But she was 18 years old when she got pregnant with me. And what happened was she was going to university in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and she met a Scottish man in the military. And so they hung out for a few weeks, and then she found out she was pregnant. And when she told him, she never heard from him again. And so I did find out later that my grandparents really wanted her to keep me. She was quite adamant that she wanted me to go to a good home and be raised by two parents in a stable household. And I found out afterwards that my grandparents had really wanted to keep me if she didn't want to, but that would still prove quite challenging and be hard for her. So I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason, and I came down this road for a purpose, and I don't have any resentment for sure.
And if I don't know if she explored this, it would be a question that I would have asked, but the decision for her to not abort the baby, on the one hand, is I say a lot of people are going to commend that, because I suspect it would have been an easy option back in the time, but I'm not sure, because it's a relatively long time ago.
Yeah, it was 72, so I don't know how easy that. I'm not sure how accessible they were back then.
Did you ask her, or did she say what it was like the day when she actually delivered and then had to put you up and actually physically give you to new parents?
Yeah, it was a difficult decision for her to make, for sure. I think, I'm not sure how long I was with her in the hospital, but I don't think it was for very long. And I went straight into foster care for 2 months before I was taken in by my parents. And then I was adopted. I was born September the 19th, and I was adopted on November the 24th. So I kind of have two birthdays.
And since having met your biological mother, a lasting relationship, or has it sort of, you gone your separate ways?
I wouldn't, we're not especially close, but anytime I would go to Edmonton, I would go see her or stay with her or whatever. I haven't talked to her too much since the convoy happened. She and an aunt that I have that lives there, she's very close to me in age, actually. I think she's only 6 years older than me, and we get along famously. We're a lot alike in a lot of ways, but she works for the federal government. So they haven't really said any, they kind of just wanted to stay away from this. And I don't like to push, I feel like they have my number. If they want to talk to me, they can reach out. I don't like making people feel uncomfortable, believe it or not.
Well, I got
unless you're Justin Trudeau.
Okay, so that's 19. What are you studying in university? What did you end up doing in life before having your own family, and then before getting into the decade? Shit went mad. So, what did you end up studying in university, and what did you end up doing professionally in life?
Well, I went to I had a daughter very early. I was just turning 18 years old when my first daughter was born, and I went to Hair Design Academy in Moose Jaw for a while, and worked in the trade of hair and aesthetics for a couple years. And then when I went to college, I took emergency communications, and that is what really brought me into logistics. So I went to college in Saskatchewan, and then my ex-husband and I moved to Medicine Hat, where I worked as a 911 operator for a while, and then I got into logistics in the oil patch. And So yeah, that's kind of my logistics background. I worked predominantly in the energy industry in Alberta since I've lived there.
Okay, Tamara, I'm a nosy bastard, and you say one thing, and I have to. You worked as a 911 operator, or the person receiving the emergency calls.
Yes, yeah, that's the course that I took at college. It was called emergency communications. So I
How
was
many
there for about a
years
year and a half. Yeah.
is that? As exhausting, burnouting, and traumatic of an experience as I imagine it would be?
That was it was high stress, high demand. It could be very intense sometimes, just like the oil patch actually. But what I found was I was good at it. I discovered, I was in my early 20s, and trying to find my place in the world, and I'd been a waitress, and I'd like worked in the service industry, and all of a sudden I had this job where I discovered I worked really well under pressure, and I worked really well on tight deadlines. And so it's just something that I liked, organizing things and putting everything into place, you know what I mean? And doing it under pressure.
Again, I have to ask, and we'll move on to something else. Do you have one distinct or one specific memory of the time you spent as an emergency responder, or the I forget now, I just lost the term, but do you have one particularly memorable event of that year and a half?
I do, and I'll tell you one of the ones that sticks out in my mind the most was I took a call from a lady who was phoning for the police because she thought there was somebody in her home. It was late at night, probably 11 or 12 at night, and she thought she heard somebody in her house. And so, of course, I took the call. We dispatched the police to her house. I stayed on the phone with her and just kept her calm and, told her what to do. Obviously, there's a bunch of protocols in place. And the poor thing, she was so scared. And then when the police got there, I'm on the phone with her. The police are arriving. They're in your yard. They're looking here. They're looking there. And she actually called me back after that call was resolved. It turned out she was not in any danger, and she called me back to thank me. She was just so grateful that I listened to her, which was so touching for me because it was my job. And just that she felt compelled to express her gratitude for something like that, I just thought was so sweet and kind.
That's amazing. Okay. And so you did that for a year and a half. By the time you move out from that, or move on from that, how old are you, and what's your life like? When do you have kids? When do you get married?
Yeah, I had my first daughter when I was just turning 18, like I said, and my second daughter came 4 years later, and then my youngest was born in 2002. So yeah, I went straight from there right into the oil patch, and I absolutely loved it too. My ex-husband worked in the oil patch also, so I was quite familiar with a lot of it. And I loved it. I loved working with the crews. I loved working with the other dispatchers, and that was all in Medicine Hat. I worked and I had some great managers.
For someone who has never worked in the oil fields, I think I've seen them when I drove through Texas. What does that type of work consist of? I mean, it's high risk, I know, but I presume that depends on what positions you hold. But what is life like working in the oil patches?
It's hard work. It's long hours, working in extreme weather conditions, but it's exciting. It's usually, most things are fairly fast paced, which is great. Again, deadlines. I mean, the type of work that I did, I was in the office, obviously, but the great thing about the Canadian oil patch is that they're very safety conscious. They take that very, very seriously. When I hear Stephen Guilbeault talking about our terrible dirty oil, or Justin Trudeau, it really infuriates me, because we really do have, one of the most environmentally friendly extraction of our resources in all of the world. We are efficient, and we are environmentally friendly, and we do look after the environment, like through reclamation or whatever afterwards. So it makes me very frustrated when I hear that industry here in Canada being demonized, when we should be singing its praises.
One thing I've only recently become very sensitive to or understood is the Wexit movement and the resentment of the West to the East. I was, I'm familiar with certain things. I forget what what's it called? The payments where the equalization payments,
Equally, yeah.
which is that's, every province pays up to the federal, and then the federal divvies it out provincially, but not proportionately to what each province pays up. And so there ends up being a transfer of wealth from the resource-rich provinces of the West to the purportedly poor provinces of the East, but that might only because the Eastern provinces are not exploiting the resources that they have, and the West has been resentful of that. How long has the Wexit movement existed as a concept, and how long has it been around for?
2019, I think, is when it first started. I can't remember. It was shortly after Brexit. And I think that was around 2017, 18, if I remember correctly. But I think the Wexit movement here in Canada was about early 2019. Yeah.
So you're working in the oil fields, and for anybody who doesn't know, like, there is the demonization of the West, the tar sands, the oil. It's dirty and yada yada yada. The flip side is, you have to transport. If you don't produce it, you have to transport it. You end up with disasters like the Megantic disaster for transporting things along rails. You don't produce it at home. You end up having to buy it from tyrannical regimes, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Venezuela, and you end up crippling your local economy for nobody's benefit except for the virtue signaling that comes along with saying we're net zero as a country, but we still have to buy our stuff from awful countries. Has the demonization of the West and the natural resources there gotten exponentially worse in the last decade, or has it always been bad, but we just haven't been paying attention to it?
I would say it's gotten much worse. Yeah, much worse. Yeah, and I was in the same boat. What we hear in the West is how much the East hates us, and like you just said, doesn't want our dirty oil, and we live in a country where I think to be successful, we need to support each other, not just individually or in communities, but as an entire country. It doesn't make any sense to me. And like you said, we're importing it from countries that have abhorrent human rights violations. So, I mean, there is definitely a sentiment there. And, but that's one of the first eye-opening experience I had with the convoy was when I was talking to the Quebecois. Within 3 days, they had 1,000 trucks ready to go, and I'm chatting, Google Translate and chatting on my monitors. And these people were just like me. They had the same concerns as me. They had the same dreams as me. They had the same heartbreak as me, and they really, look at what happened to Quebec during the pandemic. I mean, those guys were rightfully angry.
We're going to move this over to Rumble. I just want to read a few of the super chats because there's a bunch that are coming in. Dance Dance Revolution. That was the corner intersection in downtown Ottawa where they had the dance party. We're going to get into all of this, people. This has just been the intro. Tamara, you are one of my heroes. Thank you for being here and for hanging in there. Oh, we're going to get into that because I need to know what prison is like. I have to know what you went through. Evil triumphs when good people do nothing. And we've got Alex Davy Duke, $100 super chat. Hi, David. Thanks for interviewing my favorite person. We're going to carry this over. Thank you, Viva, for still trucking for Canada. FC's a day. Freedom Convoy brings hope. Let's never forget. Yeah. Well, we're going to get into, unfortunately, the lesser pleasant side of the convoy. But come over to Rumble because we're going to get into your I'll call it activism, but your pre-political involvement that preceded the convoy, because some people might not be aware of your progression and then the convoy. So over to Rumble right now, people. Doesn't change anything from our end, Tamara, and I'll put the entire interview up tomorrow on YouTube. 3, 2